Good evening. Welcome to Community Homeworks. We're glad you're joining us this evening for our workshop. I wanted to welcome you all. If you are joining us live tonight, please go down into the comment section down below there and make a comment about where you are joining us from. We'd like to know where folks are from. You don't have to do your actual street address. Just do like, oh, we're from the east side of Kalamazoo, or oh, we're from Hickory Corners, or wherever you're joining us from. We like to know that kind of thing. My name is Jason Byler. I am the education manager here at Community Homeworks. I'm the one who gets to help figure out what classes we're going to offer and who we're going to have instructing and all that kind of thing. If there's a class you would like to see us offering, please either put that in the comment section, or you can also send it to us on email, a suggestion. Our email address is education@communityhomeworks.org. And we will try to get back to you from there. If you have suggestions or ideas for classes, we'd like to hear those. Community Homeworks is a nonprofit organization here in Kalamazoo, Michigan. We have a mission to empower homeowners to maintain safe, sustainable, and dignified homes. We basically want homeowners to learn how to take care of their own homes so that they don't have to hire a contractor, or if they do need to hire one, that they are able to make informed decisions about what gets done on their home. Our workshop for this evening is common door repair, and we are joined tonight by my good friend Lee. There's Lee Taylor right there, the one and only. And unfortunately, Lee's wife is not joining us tonight because she hurt her back. So Lori, if you're watching this, I hope you're feeling better soon. We miss you. But Lee, it's time to get started, and welcome to Common Door Repair.
All right. Thanks, Jason. I don't know if you said this. I was kind of zoning out. It's a long day. If you have questions, did you talk about that?
I didn't.
Okay. So if you have questions, please put them in the comment area so that I'll hopefully be able to answer them. And yeah, it does help the class kind of go a little better. Comments and questions also help us develop our classes. We kind of go off of what people want to know. So if we don't know, we don't know. Anyway, so it's common door repairs. I'm going to be mostly talking about, I'm mostly going to be focusing on this door. This is an exterior door, one of the props. Everything that I'm talking about, for the most part, is going to be transferable to an interior door also. So a lot of, like I said, most of that stuff you can use for an interior door or an exterior door. So, but I'm going to pick on this one because it's right here. So I like to start with just the basic the basic parts of most doors. Just so that if I say it later, you're not going, oh, what's that? So again, basic. But you got your door itself, and it's a prop, so it likes to move. You got your frame of your door. You have your threshold down here, and the threshold is specifically for exterior doors. Interiors usually do not have thresholds. I've seen some that have them, but usually no. So your threshold is down here, your frame, and then the door itself. On the other side, you have, and this is exterior only. I'm gonna break the door. You have what's called brick mold. This is actually goes around. This is on the outside of the door. This is what a piece of it looks like. You know, it's just basically stapled right on or nailed on. So this is part of the frame, but not part of the frame, if that makes sense. But it is important. I'll get to why it is important. I'm going to say on an exterior door why it's important is if you have, let's say you have a screen door that you want to put on. The screen doors are always connected to your brick mold. So you always say, okay, what size screen am I going to need? What you're going to want to do is measure between your brick mold, and that between the brick mold is 36 inches, and height is relatively standard most of the time. But your height, so your width is between, for a screen door, is between brick mold. Height is off of where the threshold is sitting. So if you're on a step or something along that line, you're going to set it and then measure up and hold the tape measure right so you can actually measure up. And this door is 80 and 7/8 high. And it's about standard. Now, why I say that is sometimes older homes have a little bit different size doors. And that's where, you know, if you have an older home, you know, before they got into standardizing certain widths and heights, you may have an issue with some things. So it's one of those little things to kind of think about. So, you know, when you're putting on a screen door, those are the measurements you want to be able to take. On that note, people ask, I'll spin this thing around again. They ask things like, how do I know what size door I have? Well, that's simple enough. So, I mean, if you have a 36-inch door, you're talking about the door itself. Let's do it down here. Is a hair less than 36. But really what it is you're measuring. Can you see that? You're measuring from frame, inside a frame to inside a frame. The door itself is always going to be a hair less, but that's what you want to be able to measure as far as the door itself. And we'll get into why that's important a little bit later. So the other parts that I'm going to be talking about are the swing of a door. So it's always, people usually get confused with this. The easiest way to think of it is this. If I put my back to the hinge side here, right? And that door swings to my left hand swings out like this, it's a left hand swing. If it swings to my right, it's a right hand swing. So that's the easiest way, is just, it doesn't matter what door, walk up to it, put your back to the hinge side, and whatever way it swings, left swing or right swing, that's what it's going to be. Because it can get costly sometimes where you're like, you're thinking you're standing on the outside and you're like, the knob's on the left. And they're thinking you're on the inside. So it's just, that's where that confusion can come in. So talking about swinging the door, put your back to the hinges, whatever way the door swings, whether it's right or left, that's what it is. The other is, well, hinge side. And then you have what's called your strike side. Strike side is where your, thank you, where your latch and your deadbolt and all this are. The other parts that you're going to have are called, what's called a reveal. I don't know if you can see this up top or not. You can. So it's the gap from the door, top of the door, to the frame. And you can see with this one how this gap widens up the closer it gets to the strike side of the frame. Well, why is that? Well, part of it is this is a prop, but what's happening with that door is gravity's taking hold and it's sagging this way. And yes, this is because this is a prop, but that can happen in your home too. So a lot of people have, like, especially exterior doors, but interior doors can do it also. And what happens is that door sags, and all of a sudden, I don't know if you can see that or not, your latch right here is not lining up and not necessarily getting in. There are some people who are like, oh, I got to lift my door up for it to make it latch. Well, there's an easy fix with that. What happens is, like I said, that door over time starts to sag. So if you have that issue, and a lot of times too, up here, it'll start rubbing against the frame. It'll start rubbing here. It won't want to latch with the deadbolt or the regular lock set. And it sometimes will rub on the bottom real bad. So if you have a door like that, open this up here, spin this guy around. What you have to look at, can you see these hinges up here? So you have these screws. And this is, like I said, the exterior door usually has a larger hinge. We'll get into hinges a little bit more. But there'll be a screw closest to the center of the door frame. In case this is this one here. Most of the time, that screw is a little bit longer screw. It might be an inch, or it might be like a 2-inch screw or something along that line. Now, why is that? You have to think about your framing, all right? And the framing, let's spin this door around again. The framing is on either side of your door frame. Now, depending on how it was built, sometimes that lumber is really close to your frame. Sometimes there's a little bit of a gap. It just boils down to how big they made that opening. But what you're doing is you're going to be running that screw into your actual framing. So here's that hole where that screw went through. And why don't we use these other two? The issue with that is that sometimes, depending on how the house is, your framing might not get all the way out to this inner edge. So people will try to put adjustment screws in there, and they're digging into their plaster, or they're digging into their drywall, something along that line. It just doesn't work. So that's why you want to go closer to the center of the frame and make sure you're going to be able to catch the actual framing of your house. What you want to do is take that screw out, find a longer one that's going to fit, and we'll talk about size of the heads and stuff. And you're going to be running that screw in. Now, that can be difficult sometimes. And the only reason I say it can be difficult is because you're having to put a decent amount of pressure on that screw to be able to pull that door back up. But as you tighten that screw, what's going to happen is, and if you look at the reveal up here, I need to make it do what I want to do. What you're going to do is take a look at that gap, that reveal on the top before you start doing it. And again, we talked about pretty tight here on the hinge side, and it opens up closer you get to the strike side. So as you're tightening that screw down, that adjustment screw, what it's doing is it actually is going to kind of warp the frame and lift it a little bit. So what I do when I'm doing something like that, I usually will use like an impact driver or something along that line, and I'll usually use like a torque screw. They're a star drive. They bite a lot better. And I will just tighten it up a little bit. Close that door, see if it latches. Take a look at your reveal again. And you keep doing that. And I mean, most of the time you can take up a decent amount of that door. You leave that screw in, it helps keep that frame squared up, I guess is the best way to put it. That usually is going to fix the bulk of your problems. There are some things that can happen, and this boils down to how much space there is in here between your frame and your framing. If it's a really big gap, it gives you a little bit more play. But sometimes, if it's really tight, let's say that framing of your house, this is something you can't really tell about pulling off trim and stuff. Let's say that framing in your house and stuff is right up against this. You have no adjustment. Does that make sense? There's nothing there. Versus your framing is, half an inch or 3/4 of an inch away from your frame, versus that gives you a little bit of adjustment. So, like I said, that adjustment screw is the easiest way to be able to make that latch catch. Now, remember how I said there's differences in hinges? So a big 4-inch hinge like this is usually exterior doors, versus an interior door is a smaller hinge like this. Don't even bother with this part. But so, and if you're doing this adjustment screw on an interior door, again, you want the one that's closest to the frame center, and that would be that one right there, versus this one, where it would be that one there. That would be the one that would be closest to the frame. So, like I said, you can open it up and take a look and see. So that part, as far as that adjustment goes, most of the time that's going to work out pretty good. It will get to a point where you won't be able to get much more out of it. At that point, what you can do is, I can spin this guy around again, sorry. This is where, we don't have a strike on this. This is where you may have to work on dropping that strike plate. And the strike plate looks like, well, I didn't grab a box. My brain is somewhere else. That's deadbolt. Come on. Fire. So that's your strike plate. Sits in there like this. And what happens is if you, let's say you adjusted that up, you got as much of that reveal, tighten up as you could, but it's still not latching. And this is where you pull these two little strike. You pull that strike off, and you can shift it down. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll flip it around, and I'll figure how much it's going to drift, how much I need to bring it down, and then trace it out, get my utility knife, cut that line, and then chisel and go ahead and cut that. Now, the issue with that is if you do that, let's say you drop it, we'll say about that much, you're going to be left with this gap on top. And that's one of those things that if that really bugs you, you can fill it in and all that sort of stuff. But I usually use this as kind of a last resort. It's more work than you'd think. So, but it is possible to do. So if you end up having to drop your strike plate, yes, you have to cut out for the plate so that it sits flush in your frame, that it's not sticking out, because that can mess with the door also. So you have to chisel all that out. But sometimes you have to chisel out that hole a little bit and drop that down a little bit. Because I've seen that where people have dropped their plate down, but they haven't scarfed out this part, and the strike on the door or the latch on the door is hitting that. So little details like that. The other part is your deadbolt. So if you're at a point where you're having to drop your strike plate for your latch on your door, most likely you're going to have to drop your deadbolt, also your deadbolt plate. And that sits in there, and you may have to drop that. And all the same rules apply. You have to kind of figure where that's going to be and shift down that plate, and then possibly scarf out a little bit with the chisel or whatever, so that deadbolt will actually go through and latch.
We have a question.
Okay.
Do you do that with the middle and bottom hinge also, or just the top hinge?
Just the top hinge. So you can throw a longer screw in the bottom and middle. Some people do for security reasons, and we're going to get into that a little bit. But that top one is mainly your adjustment. The bottom ones don't really adjust anything necessarily. So the other thing, another reason, or another, I guess, cause of doors sticking or rubbing can be that the hinge itself, that the screws in the hinge have stripped out. And what I mean by that is, so if you have your door hinge, if you close that door and that hinge actually shifts out, it means that most likely the screws in there have nothing left to bite. Because again, if you look at the thickness of your frame, most of those screws are not even really going to really penetrate through that frame. If I'm looking at these, I can see just the little tip of that screw running through this frame. So there's really not much necessarily holding that hinge on. And sometimes it doesn't take much at all to really strip that out. And what will happen is that hinge, in a sense, when that door opens, that whole hinge will shift out. So how you check for that? Well, the easiest way to check for that is to go ahead and get your screwdriver. Most of them are Phillips. You're going to get your screwdriver, you're going to open up your door. But what you're doing is, we'll start with the frame. So I'm going to go through and see if I can just turn these. If I can sit there with a regular screwdriver and just spin, and that screw just sits there and spins, that means it's been stripped out. So what you want to do is pull that screw out. You want to do one hinge at a time. I personally, I'll just pull out whatever screw is stripped and just sitting there spinning and not biting anything, not grabbing. And what I'll do is I'll get a toothpick, or some people say a golf tee. I think more people have toothpicks than golf tees, but so I get toothpicks and simple wood glue. And what I'll do is I'll dip the toothpick in a little wood glue, and I'll stick it in there. It looks like a porcupine. I'll let it sit for a little while. It doesn't take too long. Then what I'll do is I'll cut it off. What that's doing is filling up that hole back with wood. Sometimes you can run the screw back in. There's no issues. Sometimes, even better yet, what you do is you get a very small drill bit, like a little 1/8 inch drill bit, and drill another hole through that toothpick, or through those multiple toothpicks in there, and then put that screw back in, and it's going to be enough for that screw to be able to grab. So that can happen on the frame. That also can happen on the door. So what can happen on the door is the same thing. So, like I said, when you go through, you can go through and check your screws going into your frame. You can also go through and check your screws going into your door itself. And if it's stripping on the door, it's pretty much the same thing. Even if your door is a metal door. And the reason for that is that with exterior doors, you always have a wood frame. So what this is screwing into is wood. It's not necessarily metal. Commercial doors might be a little different, but most of these doors have a wood frame, whether the skin of it is fiberglass or steel or whatever. So you can treat those all the same. The other issue is, like I said, that's all these hinges. Most exterior doors have 3 hinges. The other thing that can happen that will actually push this door out is, let's say somebody painted And you can see here, you probably can't really see, but the hinge is flush with the frame. I can run my finger along it, and I don't feel that hinge necessarily sticking out beyond that frame. But what can happen is over time, people may paint their door or their frame or something along that line. That's fine. And they may pull that door off. And they're painting their frame and everything else. They're getting a bunch of paint gook in there. And they don't wipe it out. And then they go ahead and put their hinge back on. And what happens is that hinge, instead of being flush, all of a sudden pushes out, which ends up pushing the whole door closer to your strike side and making it rub. So that's another thing you can do. Your hinge should be a hair deeper than the frame or flush with it. If it's sticking out past, that might be a little thing that you can look at, especially if it's that top hinge. But I've seen it happen on any one of them. So, and the same thing can happen on the door itself too. So, I mean, the door itself, where the hinge is connected to the door, should be flush or a hair deeper than the door frame itself. So, those usually are the most common things. There is another little thing that can happen. This one. And I'm going to pick on these here. So this normally has a pin in it. What can happen with, overusage, the hinge may just wear out, is you'll have a lot of slop. Even with that pin in there, you may have a whole bunch of movement this way. And that basically means that you have to replace your hinge. So if you've done all that stuff and you think your hinges are in good shape, they're biting into something, you put your adjustment in, it's still rubbing. What you can do is you can grab the door itself and you can kind of push back and forth. And what you're looking for is play in that hinge. So again, if it's open like this, being grouchy, if it's open like this and you move that door and your hinge actually, with the pin in it, actually moves, it just means that it's wore out. So then it means you would need to be able to go out and get a new hinge. The best thing you can do with that is to be able to remove the hinge, because there are a bunch of different styles out there. So I want to get into that real quick. And I'm going to get into how you would actually, if you have to pull your door off for whatever reason, how to safely do that. So spin this guy back around. And we're going to talk about how to remove a door safely. And you can do this on your own. First step is you want to make sure it's latched. Me personally, I'll latch it. If I can, I'm going to throw the deadbolt, but I want to make sure it's latched. So that's first step. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a flat blade screwdriver and a hammer. You can do it a couple ways, so it depends. Most of the hinges are open on the bottom here, so I can get something like a little nail set or even a nail. But when I'm removing the door, I want to start at the bottom. So if your hinge pin, let's say your hinge pin is driven all the way down like this, and it makes it hard. Normally what you do is you get a flat blade screwdriver and you'd put it underneath the head and be able to tap it up. But sometimes that can be a real bear, just if they're driven all the way down like that. So this is where you would, if you have a case like that, or they've been painted a zillion times and they're really hard to get, and it has an open bottom, I can get a nail set like this and hit it on the bottom enough to where I'm going to get that pin up. Now, I'm not going to do this on this. So what I would do is at that point, I'd go ahead and tap this up like this, remove that pin. I'm going to do the same thing on the middle. Before I get to the top, I'm going to make sure my door is still latched, because if you're doing this just to paint your door or whatever you need to do, it stinks when you get to the last hinge and all of a sudden your door goes flunk and falls out and it breaks your frame and chaos ensues and everything else. So what I'll do usually, even if that door's latched, what I'm going to do is I'll put my foot or something up against that door and I'll do that final pin. I'll keep my hand on it, pushing in towards the frame. Now all my 3 pins are out. And then what I'm going to do is I put a hand here, I hold the latch, I go like this, and realize that that door is all of a sudden going to want to move out. And then I grab it and be able to get that door out. Exterior doors are a lot heavier, so you have to kind of be prepared for that. Most of the time, if they drop on the inside, they're only dropping about that much. So if you have somebody to help you, that is the ideal thing, but you can do it on your own. You pull that door off, do whatever you need to do. And then when it comes time to actually put the door back on, this is where it's a little trickier. What you do is you start from the top first. So what I'm going to do is, it can be done. It can be real tricky, but you're going to have your pin ready. You're going to put your door in. You're going to line this up, and I'll get into that a little bit more. You're going to line it up just so it goes in. I'm going to put my hand on that door, drop that pin in, have a hammer, tap it down. And now I can take my hands off the door for the most part and be able to get my middle hinge and my bottom hinge. So what happens with these usually? It's called I walk off with mine. So if you look at these, you have one that has 2, one that has 3. You're going to hear all sorts of things. Me personally, I like to have the one that has 3 receivers for your hinge pin on the door. Why is that? It's because I'm lazy and I want to be able to put my finger underneath that and hold this to be able to help guiding in, versus I can't put my finger there. So that's just my laziness. Makes my life a little bit easier. What can happen too is, especially if you pull the hinges off, they might be a little off. You know, they might be like this or it might be like this. So, and this is something that you don't know until you start actually working on putting that door back on. So sometimes what you can do, let's say you get that top pin in, great. And then you go to line your middle one up and they're offset. You know, they're offset one way or the other. So what you can do is you can gently tap, say, the hinge on the frame down or up, and then the opposite for the door, down or up. And it's not, I'm not saying whack it really hard, but just enough. You know, sometimes just a light tap and they'll be able to slip back in. Then you go ahead and you drop your pin in. And you may have to do the same thing with the bottom. Some people leave the hinges, or I'm sorry, the screws a little loose. You can. Always makes me a little nervous knowing how small those screws are. Those hinges will move a little bit when you tap them. But, you know, the key thing to remember is get your top pin in first when you're putting that door in. That way, if for some reason your hands get off of it, it's not going to be falling. Because I've seen it where somebody gets their bottom pin in, and then their middle pin or bottom pin, and they're fighting with their middle pin, and all of a sudden that door decides to move and fall, and it rips your door frame apart, and it's bad. So understanding that, how to safely take that off. Like I said, most exterior doors are going to be relatively heavy. So keep that in mind. Interior doors generally are a lot lighter most of the time. So they're a little bit easier to handle. But exterior doors, it is possible to be able to do on your own, but try to have somebody helping you.
We have a couple questions, Lee.
Oh, go ahead.
Dorothy said, my entrance door has 4 screws in each hinge.
Yep.
The screws closest to the center of the frame are the 2 middle ones. Do I do this to fix both of the middle screws?
Just one. So you're saying you have a hinge that looks like this, 2, 3, 4. So in this case, it'd be the first one from the top that's closest to the center of your frame. So I do want to pick on these style hinges. You may have this style hinge as a decorative knobs on it. Most of the time, they're going to be put in where this is actually the pin head. Now, because they've been painted over and everything else, sometimes it's a bit of a challenge to be able to get a screwdriver underneath that and drive this up, because this one has a cap on the bottom. Can't drive that pin or that nail set through. So with this style, most of the time, this will pull out if you work at it. The older the hinge, usually the grouchier it is. So hopefully that answered your question with that. You said there was a couple of questions?
I've got one other one.
All right.
Karen wants to know, she said the pane trim around the windows have yellowed over time. Can they be replaced, or do I just have to live with it?
Oh, the plastic on the outside is what you're talking about? Mostly, I think that's what she's talking about.
I think so.
Yeah. So yeah, that plastic around if you have a light or a window or something in your door, doesn't matter. Yeah, that can yellow. Yes, you can paint it. I would talk to a good painting company in town, and tell them what you're going on. There might be some things that you have to prep it with a little bit. The other thing to keep in mind is that's usually on the outside, and sometimes it's UV damage that does that, changes the color of it. It usually makes it brittle. Sometimes I've seen it where they get to a point where they may not be able to be painted. But again, if you talk to a good painting store, they should have a product that's able to deal with that. So hopefully that answers your question.
Do they sell replacement ones of those, or?
You can, but they're glued in, So, I mean, if you look at this closely, there are screws in here. So I can go ahead and pull these screws out, right? And then pry this off and then get this out. But this whole thing is like siliconed in and everything else. So yes, you can get a replacement. It may be difficult to find the manufacturer of the door. Generally, this is what they call a 9-light door, right? 9 lights. You would have to find the right size and everything else. And then you'd have to make sure it's siliconed in so that you don't have any leaks. And at that point, you might be able to just get a new door. So, but yeah, I mean, glass companies, those would be the one to talk to. Sometimes they can find those. Most often, what happens with these doors is over time, it gets lost as far as what manufacturer, but you do bring up a good point. Sometimes if you're lucky, I'm saying only if you're really lucky, on this part of the hinge or the door, the back side, it goes to the hinges, sometimes there'll be a manufacturing sticker on there. Again, if you're lucky. that can help if you're having to get a replacement part or something like that for it. But that can be problematic, I guess. And that's where you would want to try to figure out who manufactured that door, and then see if you can even get parts like that for it. Like I said, a good glass company may be able to help you with that also. The frame, generally the frame itself on the outside is the one that actually yellows. And that's usually part of the glass. It's like fused on, and they put it in, and then they just apply the one on the inside with those screws, and they screw together. So
sometimes there's writing on the window.
Sometimes.
Does that ever tell you what the brand is, or is that something else?
Yeah, this one has it, yeah. So this one has it right here. Thank you. I kind of forgot about that. It does. So yeah, sometimes we'll have it down in this corner. So, yep.
Dorothy, who had written about the four screw hinge, said the two middle screws on her hinges are in identical position. So they're both farthest from the trim.
It's a strange hinge.
Dorothy has a very interesting hinge.
Yeah.
So just one
point,
screw or two screws?
I would pick one, usually the highest one. So if you have a situation like that, then yeah, you want to pick the highest one that's closest to the center of that frame. So, if you're ever having to get new hinges, I do want to point out a couple little things. Like I said, it's best if you're having to replace that hinge, take the hinge actually in. It's the size. So this is an interior size this way, size this way, your height and your width. The other is radius. So generally there are 3 styles. And if you look at these, you have this one, the wide radius. You have this one, short radius. And you have this one, which is just a squared off one. Does that make much of a difference? Well, yeah, it does. Because let's say you have, usually what happens is somebody has a wide radius like this and they pick up a square one and they go to put it back on, and that all of a sudden that tip of that hinge right there, see how that sticks out? So then they're having to trace that out and cut that, because if they just go ahead and put it in, now all of a sudden that hinge is popping out, throwing off your door and everything. So try to match the hinge itself. It saves you work, saves you time. They have all the styles out there. The other is this. I don't know if you can see this on film or not. I date myself. So if you look at this, there's a little bevel on this side versus this side that has no bevel. The interesting part about this is if I were to put this on any door, I could put that on and I could flip it and my holes are going to line up. Just because the holes line up doesn't mean that it's in correctly. What will happen is 2 things. Your screw head is going to stick out past your frame, or the body of your hinge. And when you go to open your door, it's going to open up to a certain point and bind and stop, not want to open anymore. And that's just how they're designed. So what you want to do is you want to look for that bevel. When you're running that screw in, you want to make sure that screw head is flush. And that's where the head of the screw makes a difference. So if you got a giant head, well, it's never going to fit in there. So what you can do is, if you're not sure, have your hinge, drop a screw in there, and it should be flush and not sticking out too much. And not so small that it flies through. So, but keep that in mind, because that happens, especially if you're changing your hinges out or whatever. People will just get in a rhythm of putting them on, and they'll be like, oh, all the screw holes lined up, so it's fine. Yeah, maybe not. So keep that in mind. And if you do change your hinges out on any door, what you want to do is when you go to operate your door, don't fling it open, because if those hinges are put on backwards, they said it's going to get to a certain point, the hinge is going to bind up, and it's going to feel like something's restricting that door from opening, because it is. The hinges. It usually means stop, don't force it. And usually it's when you go to close it. Sorry. When you go to close it, it gets to a point and it doesn't want to close anymore. So you never want to force it. Just take a look at your hinges, and it may be that issue of having to just flip that hinge around. Same thing can happen on the door frame itself, or I'm sorry, on the door itself. And like I said, the trick I like is I put the one that has 3 like this on the door itself, just so that it's easier for me to be able to put my finger underneath, be able to put that door on and off again. If you have standard hinges, and I think standard as far as hinges like this where it's open on the bottom, what I like to do is when I set those hinges, those pins, I usually will leave it up just a hair, just a little bit. Not going to hurt anything, but it makes it easier later if you have to get your screwdriver underneath it. You can actually get your screwdriver underneath it and pop it up. If you have the hinge that has a hole, or I'm sorry, a cap on the bottom, that's especially important because it's really difficult to get that open. So, and most of the time, those type of hinges are on a style of door. It's called an outswing door. They're usually like a security hinge. An outswing door basically means like it's an exterior door that swings to the outside. And those hinges, the pins and everything else, are on the outside. So they'll have hinges where it makes it more difficult so somebody just doesn't come up and go pop your hinges out and take your door off or walks in your house. So they're usually some kind of a security hinge. So the other thing that can make doors, I guess, react. How much time do I have? 10 minutes? Okay.
10 minutes.
So another thing that can make doors react is moisture. So sometimes what happens is your door in the wintertime, or if it's really dry in the house, it may work fine. It latches, no, it doesn't rub, nothing. And in the summertime, humidity kicks up, and all of a sudden that door starts to become grouchy and rubbing on the strike side and everything else. And you go, all right, and you look at your reveal on the top and you go, well, my reveal is pretty much consistent with from the hinge side to the strike side. So I don't think that door is sagging. You look at your hinges, nope, they're all good and tight. All my screws are tight. The hinges are in good shape. What's happening is the door itself is expanding. It's sucking up moisture and swelling. I'll show you a couple of hollow core doors. And this can happen with any door. So what happens a lot of times is, and I'm going to pick on interior doors, but it can happen with the exterior doors too. People will paint their door. And they think, they think about the front, they think about the back, or the inside, the outside. They may think about the sides as far as painting it. Very rarely do they actually think about the top or the bottom of that door. If you actually read the instructions that come with the new exterior door, it's going to say paint all sides of your door. Because what can happen is that the top of the door, even one like this, if it's left unfinished, which is the way it comes from the factory, it's just kind of a big open channel for moisture to get into it. So what you want to do is, if you get a new door, take the door off. You want to take the weather stripping off. I didn't even get into that part. And paint your front, your inside, your outside, your left side, your strike side, your hinge side, the top and the bottom. And that paint, a good primer and a good paint, will seal up that door and make it less likely for moisture to be able to get into it. Certain doors do react a little bit differently. Sometimes I've seen it like with a steel door. Sometimes I've seen it where it just gets really, really hot and that whole door expands out. Not much you can do about that, really. That gets tricky. But you know, if it's a high humidity and your door starts rubbing and sticking and stuff like that, it might be one of those issues. Now, there is one other issue you might be able to deal with. So we've been talking about the hinge side and the reveal on the top. There's another reveal to look at. The reveal, sometimes what you want to look at, is on your strike side. So what can happen is, what you want to do, I guess, is probably the best way to put it, is look at what that reveal, that gap, is a reveal, is on the top. And that should be relatively consistent all the way down. What can happen is your frame, for whatever reason, may be bowed one way or the other. I've seen where frames have a bow this way or a bow this way. Most of the time that frame bows in, so you might see a larger gap starting in this area and maybe going down to here. And usually what that means is that somebody ran in longer screws, like for your lock set or your deadbolt or whatever, and actually warped that frame this way. So to a point where that latch doesn't want to engage into that strike. What you can do also, if you think that might be the case, so what you can do is open your door up and you think you've seen, you know, you're looking at a reveal on your strike side and it's all over the place. You can get a relatively long, some kind of long straight edge. Some people use they may have a 6 foot level, or they may have something that they know is straight. What they're doing is they're putting it right up to the frame. And that will show if there's gaps or if it bulges out. So, that sometimes is where it's really tight and you get a little bit of humidity and everything swells up a little bit and all of a sudden that door is rubbing. Or vice versa. You have to, you never can get it to latch because this has moved in towards your framing so much that it barely can catch. That is usually more so on dry winter, wintertime, where there's absolutely barely any moisture in the air at all. So like I said, that moisture or lack of moisture can cause expansion and contraction issues. But most often that what happens is somebody puts in long screws and that frame warps out this way. And in that case, if it catches in the summer, sometimes it doesn't want to catch in the winter. And this is something we'll go over more in home safety and security also. As far as trimming your door, that's the last thing I want to talk about. It's the last thing I want to talk about because it's kind of the last thing you want to do. So I'm going to pick on more modern interior doors. So if you look at this is just a cutout of a door. The door is hollow for the most part. If you're not sure, all you got to do is tap on it. It sounds hollow, sounds like a drum, most likely it's hollow. Depending on the era it's from, like I have a house that was built in the 60s, and I have hollow core doors. They're not fancy, they're just slabs. And it has actually like cardboard webbing in it, but it has a kind of a wood frame. So this wood frame goes around the whole perimeter. And then usually where the lock set is, and I'll just pick on this door for a minute, you may have a frame that is about this wide, and then they put a bigger block in here for your latch, and then that frame runs around. On the bottom, you may have a little taller frame, so bottom may be up to here, top might be the same thing, inside is about that same width. The issue is this, is what people will do is, if their door's rubbing or something along that line, what they'll do is they'll cut or sand their door. It usually rubs up here on the strike side, usually right up in this range here, and they'll end up sanding that door or cutting that door back a little bit to make it so that it doesn't rub anymore. If your door is solid wood, that much of an issue? No. But if you have a door that's a hollow core door, if you're shaving off, say, this much off of that door, you're potentially weakening that whole door. I've seen it where somebody buys a door or whatever, and it doesn't quite fit, and they trim off, let's say, a ½ inch off of one side. Well, if I take a ½ inch off of this, now I've only got half of this left, and all of a sudden that door over time is just going to blow apart. So if for some reason you ever need to trim a door, say you have an interior door that gets damaged or something, you have to replace it out. If you have to trim it, figure out how much you're going to have to trim it. If you have to trim it, say, 1/4 inch, you want to take an 1/8 inch off the strike side, 1/8 inch off the hinge side. You don't want to take it all off of one side, is basically what I'm getting at. And if you do have to do that, fine, it is what it is, but you want to be able to paint that door and seal it up, because again, what you've done is you've exposed that wood, that raw wood, that over time is going to just sit there and suck up moisture and cause other issues. But just remember not to take off either side or top or bottom. You can see on this one, yes, there is a piece of wood in here. Feels like it's about like to here. So it's a little bit wider than, say, your sides, but not much. So that's the thing with that. And realize too, if you're ever having to trim a door down, it means that you're going to have to play around with a whole bunch of things. So that's where, you want to try to avoid having to replace a door, because yes, you can trim the sides and everything, but then all of a sudden you have to cut in new hinges, and you may have to, depending on how much you take on the strike side, you may have to adjust the hole for your latch. May have to be moved a little bit because now all of a sudden it's too close. So there's a multitude of issues as far as trying to just change a door. And sometimes it gets to the point where the best thing you can do is to pull the door out, door and frame, and go ahead and replace it, because the amount of work and money you're going to spend sometimes just to be able to change the door itself and keep your frame may not be worth it necessarily. So something to keep in mind. I would say the best thing you can do, and I'm talking like off the shelf, more modern style doors, is when you have it installed, actually read those instructions and paint that door out properly the way it needs to be painted. And if it's got like that plastic or whatever, use the correct style paint for that so it doesn't yellow and whatnot and get degraded by the UV rays that are potentially hitting it. We could keep going, but it's 6 o'clock. So hopefully I've answered everybody's questions. I said if you have anything else, I'll let Jason tell you what to say.
All right. If you have other questions after the fact, feel free to write them to us. You can either write them to education@communityhomeworks.org or to info@communityhomeworks.org. I will try to put the contact info up there. There's the contact info. Lee, just a couple questions. If somebody like Dorothy has a fancy hinge, a decorative hinge, where is she going to be able to find one of those to replace? Are they going to have them at Lowe's, Home Depot, or are you going to have to look somewhere special?
Yeah, good point.
If you
If you have hinges that are
different
different than say you find at a box store, the Home Depot's, Lowe's, Menards, whatever.
take it to an architectural salvage company. And like here in Kalamazoo, we have one. And bet your money you take that hinge in there, and they're going to be like, oh, yeah, we got a bunch of them. They're in that box over there.
It's over there.
Whatever. Yeah, that's the importance of having those kind of places around because, you know, I mean, before good old internet, you could be searching
Everywhere for them. You can also do a search online, but you know, to me, there's nothing better than being able to hold it in each hand and go, well, yeah, they're the same. So yeah, architectural salvage places are a great place, especially if you have an older home and you want to get parts and pieces or even doors and all sorts of things. You do have to keep in mind lead, but that's another class. So
Lead is something we always have to keep in mind. So I appreciate you bringing that up as well. And we will bring that up more in home safety and security. I wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I wanted to thank Lee for presenting tonight. And we've got a lot of good information out there. If you have other questions, make sure you write them to us, email them to us, or give us a call, and we will try to get answers to those. I also wanted to mention next week we will be having a workshop in this same space on Tuesday at 6 p.m. Harry will be here. We're going to be talking about electrical lights and lamps, fixtures, basically fixture repair. So if you have a light fixture or a lamp that does not work or that flickers or causes other problems, you might want to take a picture of those and you can email those pictures to us. And that way we can use them. We can bring them up on the screen for next week. We are also looking at returning to in-person classes the week after that. So that will be the first week in April. We're going to have a special class on buying your first home and what all you need to know about buying a home. We have a realtor coming and a new home buyer, and we're looking for a home inspector to join us for that as well. That will be a discussion group. But we will be doing that live here at 812 Bryant Street in our education center. We will also continue to broadcast those live over Facebook and YouTube. So if you've been joining us Facebooking and YouTubing, you should be able to continue doing that, but we will be having a limited number of people coming into the classroom for one-on-one and in-person instruction. We do have certain protocol that we're going to follow to make sure everyone is safe, but we will wait and talk about that more at that point. We will only be allowing people to come who have registered, so we're not just going to have walk-ins. That way we can limit the number of people in the classroom and keep everybody safe and socially distanced. So good stuff coming up. We're looking forward to seeing everybody in person again. Again, I wanted to thank you for joining us. If you feel like you got something useful out of this workshop tonight, please head on over to our website, communityhomeworks.org, and make an online donation to our organization. It helps us to keep the lights on and the doors open and to pay for technology and all that good stuff. So head on over and do that. Thanks again for being here. Thanks, Lee, for teaching tonight. Great to see you. Have a good evening, everyone.